$50,000 in white hydrangeas, and yet the air still reeked of betrayal. Funny how money can buy baccarat crystal, but it can't mask the stench of a cheating fiancé. Victoria Sterling stood in the center of the frantic activity at the Hamptons' most exclusive event venue. The Atlantic Ocean crashed rhythmically against the dunes outside, a soothing soundtrack to what was rapidly becoming the worst day of her life. She looked down at the screen of her iPhone. The text message from Preston was still there. It hadn't been a hallucination. Vic, I can't make the rehearsal. Sarah is spiraling. She's threatening to hurt herself if I leave her alone. You're strong, Vic. You can handle the optics. Sarah, she's fragile. She needs me. Fragile. The word made Victoria's blood boil faster than a kettle. He wanted to postpone a wedding that was effectively a multi-billion-dollar merger. A wedding town and country had been hyping for months because his friend Sarah was having a meltdown. Again, Victoria didn't cry. Crying was for people who didn't have shareholders. If the wedding didn't happen by Saturday at noon, the stock swap would fail. The Sterling family legacy would tank by 15%. Preston wasn't just breaking her heart, he was breaching a contract. Miss Sterling. The wedding planner hovered nervously. The string quartet, Vivaldi or Mozart. Victoria looked up, her face a perfect porcelain mask of calm. Vivaldi, it has more bite. She walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She needed a drink, and she needed a lawyer. She headed toward the bar, intending to order a double vodka. But the bar wasn't empty. A man sat on a stool, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the top button undone in a way that suggested he held this entire event in contempt. It was Julian Prescott, the black sheep Preston's older brother, the one who had walked away from the family billions to open a classic car restoration garage. He looked up as she approached, broad shoulders, sharp jawline, and eyes the color of aged whiskey, eyes that held a cynical intelligence his brother completely lacked. You look like a woman who's about to fire someone, Julian drawled. His voice was deep, rougher than Preston's. It sounded like gravel in trouble. I'm considering it, Victoria signaled the bartender. Vodka neat, Julian raised an eyebrow. Preston isn't here, is he? He is with Sarah, Victoria said, the name tasting like acid. Ah, the eternal damsel in distress, and Preston, the eternal white knight. Julian let out a short, humorless laugh. Let me guess, she called, crying. A flat tire only he can fix? Mental health crisis, allegedly. Victoria downed half her vodka. He says I'm strong enough to handle the cancellation. He says she's too fragile to be alone. He's manipulating you, Victoria. He thinks you'll wait. He thinks you are too invested in the merger to walk, and too cold to care about the romance. Victoria felt a dangerous clarity form in her mind. The merger, she said softly, the contract states that the Sterling heir must marry a legal male heir of the Prescott direct line to unite the trusts. She turned slowly to look at Julian. The license is ready. The venue is paid for. The world is watching. She stepped into his personal space. She could smell sandalwood and expensive scotch. I don't need a soulmate, Julian. I need a signature. This is the moment Victoria became a legend. Most women would be drowning in mascara because their fiancé chose a fragile girl to play hero for Victoria. She checked the stock price. She understood that in the high-stakes world of dynastic wealth, a husband is a line item, not a savior. She didn't look for a shoulder to cry on. She looked for a partner to sign on the dotted line. Romance is volatile. Contracts are binding. You want me to take my brother's place at the altar? I want to save my company, and I think, she lowered her voice, her blue eyes locking onto his. You'd enjoy seeing the look on Preston's face when he realizes he lost the crown. A slow, wicked smile spread across Julian's face. It transformed him from an outcast into something dangerous. I am in, he said, standing up and towering over her. But on one condition. Name it. If I do this, I run the company my way. No more vanity projects. No more covering for Preston's mistakes. We actually do the work. Victoria felt a shiver. Preston treated her like a trophy. Julian treated her like a partner. Deal's Saturday morning arrived. The ink on their secret civil marriage license was barely dry. Victoria walked onto the patio of her estate, Julian a silent shadow behind her. And there they were, Preston and Sarah, in the infinity pool. Sarah was wearing a white bikini, white, for God's sake, and was currently dipping a manicured toe into the water. Preston was rubbing sunscreen on her back, laughing. Wait. But babe, Sarah's high-pitched voice drifted up. This place is insane. Can we stay the whole week? Yeah, of course, Preston soothed. My parents paid for the weekend anyway. Victoria won't mind. She's busy with business stuff. Might as well enjoy it since the wedding is off. Victoria felt Julian stiffen beside her. Unbelievable. He didn't even have the decency to hide it. Victoria didn't scream. She didn't throw a vase. That was what Sarah would do. Instead, she picked up her phone. Her voice wasn't cold, it was dead. Marcus, I have 2 trespassers at the infinity pool. Remove them. If they resist, call the Suffolk County Police and press charges for unlawful entry. She watched Preston lean in to kiss Sarah's neck. And Marcus, burn the sheets in the guest suite. I don't want anything they touched left in my house. Julian let out a low whistle. Ruthless. Efficient, Victoria corrected. The audacity used to be breathtaking, bringing the mistress to the fiancé's infinity pool. But look at the response. Burning the sheets isn't a tantrum. It's basic hygiene. You cannot build a clean future on contaminated linen. Victoria didn't scream. She didn't throw a vase. And she certainly didn't ask why. She simply outsourced the eviction to security and the sanitation to the incinerator. That is how a CEO handles a pest infestation. Security marched onto the patio. Preston looked up, confused, then outraged. What? No, I'm the groom, Preston shouted, pointing at the house. Victoria, babe, don't be dramatic. Sarah needed to calm down. You have everything, the money, the power. Why can't you just let her have this one weekend? Victoria stood behind the glass doors, unmoving. She watched as the largest guard stepped in Preston's path. Mr. Prescott, the guard boomed. Miss Sterling has requested your departure. Now. As security dragged a wailing Sarah and a shouting Preston toward the side gate, Julian pulled out his phone. Texting the lawyer, he said, a fierce pride in his eyes. Go live with the ceremony at 4 p.m. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. The wedding was a sensation. When the doors opened and Julian stood at the altar instead of Preston, the live stream went viral instantly. Number Thaswap trended worldwide before Victoria even reached the end of the aisle. Julian didn't look like a nervous replacement. He looked like a king waiting for his coronation. The officiant, sweating slightly, cleared his throat. Do you, Julian? Take this woman. Julian took Victoria's hands. His grip was firm, grounding. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked only at her. I do, Julian said. His voice was deep, rougher than Preston's, carrying without a microphone. I promise to be the partner you actually deserve, to build with you, not off of you. to stand beside you when the world is watching and when no one is. Victoria's breath hitched. Those weren't the standard vows. And do you, Victoria? I do, she said clearly. I promise to match your strength. I promise that together we will be untouchable. You may kiss the bride. Julian didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, wrapped one arm around her waist, and pulled her flush against him. The kiss wasn't a polite society peck. It was a stamp of ownership. Mutual ownership for a moment. Victoria forgot the merger and the betrayal. She just felt the heat of him. 10 miles away, in a Motel 6 that smelled of lemon pledge and regret. Preston watched the television. The banner read, Sterling Prescott merger official. The power couple of the decade. He watched as Julian turned to the camera and offered a small, terrifying wink. Preston hadn't just lost a wedding. He had been erased. The elevator ride to the penthouse took 45 seconds. Julian loosened his tie, the confident CEO mask vanishing, replaced by a tired man. Well, he said, we survived. Inside the master suite, the bed was a 4-poster monstrosity. I'll take the couch, Julian offered, grabbing a pillow. Don't be ridiculous, Victoria said, kicking off her heels. It is a California king. It is big enough for 3 people. She pointed to the middle of the mattress. This pillow is the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. Cross it, and I assume you're declaring war. Julian paused, looking at her in her silk pajamas. He scanned her face for any sign of discomfort. Finding none, he tossed the pillow onto the bed. Understood, the DMZ it is. 20 minutes later, the lights were off. Victoria. Yes, why did you do it? Preston left you. You could have let the stock crash. Why marry me? Because, she whispered into the dark. Preston is a coward, and I hate cowards. And I think you and I are going to build something that scares the hell out of all of them. She heard the sheets rustle as he settled in. Good night, boss. Good night, husband. The honeymoon wasn't Bora Bora. It was the Detroit assembly plant. Julian traded his tuxedo for work boots and jeans. He didn't look like a board member. He looked like a wolf returning to the pack. Silas Vance, the chairman, is trying to kill this plant. Julian told the skeptical workers on the floor. He cut safety budgets to boost his bonus. I'm here to fix the machines. Suddenly, the shipping office door buzzed. 3 men in expensive suits marched in, corporate fixers sent by Silas. Mr. Vance, the lead suit sneered, looming over Victoria behind the desk. Give us the files now. Stop playing CEO sweetheart. He reached for Victoria's arm to grab the manifest. He never made contact. A hand heavy, grease, stained and fast as a cobra, clamped onto the man's forearm. Don't touch her, Julian growled. The suit tried to pull away. Julian's grip was iron. He stepped between the man and his wife, his chest acting as a human shield. You can threaten me. You can threaten the company. But you take one more step toward my wife, and you'll be leaving this floor on a stretcher. Do we understand each other? The suit looked at Julian's cold eyes. Then he looked around. Outside the glass office, 50 workers were standing, holding wrenches and pry bars. An army in hard hats. The suit backed down. You are making a mistake. The only mistake, Julian said, shoving him toward the door, was thinking you could walk into my house and threaten my family. Inside the glass office, Victoria's adrenaline crashed. She slumped against the desk. You were terrifying, she whispered. I was angry, Julian said, his voice ragged. He turned to her, eyes dark. Nobody touches you, not while I'm breathing. The tension in the room snapped. He kissed her, not for the cameras. For them, it tasted of coffee and desperation. It was hot, messy, and consuming. For a moment, the contract didn't matter. The money didn't matter. Only the fact that she had married a dangerous man and she liked it. The next morning, back at the hotel, room service knocked. But it wasn't room service. Julian checked the peephole, sighed, and unlocked the latch. Preston stood there, disheveled, sunburned, wearing yesterday's clothes. Tori, Preston tried to push past Julian. Thank God, babe. Listen, it was a mistake. I panicked. But I am back now. Julian blocked the door with one arm. He didn't budge. You are interrupting breakfast, Preston, Julian said calmly. Get out of my way. She is my fiancée, wife, Julian corrected. The word was heavy, final. She is my wife. Preston looked at Victoria, who had stepped out from the bedroom, wrapping her silk robe tighter. Tori, tell him. Tell him it is a sham. I am ready to take my place at the board. Victoria looked at the man she had spent 3 years polishing. He looked pathetic. You lost your place, Preston, she said, ice in her veins. Julian isn't just a placeholder. He is the upgrade. Preston made the classic narcissist error. He thought he was the destination, when really he was just a canceled flight. He believed the position of husband would remain vacant until he decided to return. Victoria reminded him that in business and in life, incompetence is quickly replaced by talent. He wasn't erased because of malice. He was erased because a better candidate applied for the job. Preston's jaw dropped. And Preston, she added as Julian began to close the door. You owe the hotel for the minibar in your room. Venmo me. I am not covering it. Julian slammed the door in his brother's face. He locked it. He turned to Victoria, a slow, appreciative grin spreading across his face. Pack your bags, Mrs. Prescott, he said. We have an empire to steal. Here's the continuation of the story, written with the same high-stakes tension and boss babe satisfaction, tailored for your specific audience. The elevator ride to the 40th floor of Sterling Enterprises was silent. The mirrored walls reflected two people who looked nothing like the couple that had fled the altar 48 hours ago. Victoria wore a charcoal power suit, her hair pulled back into a weaponized bun. There was no trace of the weeping bride, only the CEO remained. Julian stood beside her. He was back in a suit, not a tuxedo, but a dark navy cut that emphasized the width of his shoulders. He didn't look like he was playing dress-up anymore. He looked like he owned the building. Ready? Julian asked as the floor numbers ticked upward. No, Victoria admitted, her knuckles white on her briefcase. Silas Vance has the board in his pocket. He's going to move for a vote of no confidence. He'll use the unauthorized factory audit as an excuse to bury me. Let him move, Julian said, checking his watch, a scratched vintage Rolex that looked out of place against the silk cuff. He's about to walk into a buzzsaw. The doors chimed. They stepped out. The boardroom was a glass-walled shark tank. 12 members of the board sat around the mahogany table at the head. In Victoria's chair sat Silas Vance. Silas smiled as they walked in. It was a pitying, oily smile. Victoria, Silas said, spreading his hands. And the groom, so nice of you to join us after your little field trip to Detroit. Get out of my chair, Silas, Victoria said, her voice steady. I'm afraid that chair borders on vacancy, Silas sneered, not moving. We were just discussing your conduct. Unauthorized entry into a production facility. Halting an assembly line, threatening security personnel. The board feels your judgment has been compromised. He tapped a file in front of him. I have a motion here to remove you as CEO effective immediately. pending a mental health evaluation. A few board members murmured agreement. They looked at Victoria with pity and at Julian with disdain. And Silas added, his eyes sliding to Julian, "We'll be annulling this farce of a marriage. The prenuptial agreement has a clause regarding reputational damage. Marrying the mechanic is certainly damaging." Victoria's grip on her briefcase tightened. She opened her mouth to argue bylaws. "It's not damage," Julian spoke up. His voice was calm, baritone, and carried effortlessly to the back of the room. "It's leverage," Silas laughed. "Excuse me." Julian walked around the table. He didn't sit. He paced behind the board members like a predator circling a herd. "You think the stock is up because of the wedding?" Julian asked. "Number it is up because the market smells blood. They know something is wrong with the books, and they think I am the fixer." "You are a grease monkey," Silas spat. "You fix carburetors. You don't know the first thing about corporate finance." "I fix broken systems," Julian corrected. He stopped directly behind Silas's chair. "And this company has a leak, a big one, about $2 million a month." Silas stiffened. "Preposterous." "Is it?" Julian reached into Victoria's briefcase. He pulled out the crumpled, oil-stained manifest they had seized from the factory. He tossed it onto the polished mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thwop. "Vector Logistics," Julian said. "A shell company registered in the Caymans. Sole signatory S. Vance." The room went dead silent. A board member reached out and picked up the paper. "These are shipping logs for units that don't exist," Julian continued, his voice hardening. "Silas has been billing the company for ghost trucks. He has been embezzling from the logistics fund for 5 years." Silas stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "That's a lie. This is forged. Security." "Security is already here," Victoria said, her voice icy. She pressed a button on the intercom. The doors opened. But it wasn't the building security. It was 2 officers from the NYPD's White-Collar Crimes Division, accompanied by the head of legal. "Silas Vance," the lawyer said, holding up a tablet. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding corporate fraud and embezzlement." Silas looked around the room. The board members, his allies 5 minutes ago, were staring at him with horror. He looked at Victoria, then at Julian. "You," Silas snarled at Julian. "You are nothing. You are a hired prop." "I am the husband of the CEO," Julian said, stepping in close, his voice low enough that only Silas could hear. "And if you ever come near her or her company again, I won't call the cops. I'll handle it myself." As the officers dragged a shouting Silas out of the room, the boardroom remained frozen. Victoria walked to the head of the table. She righted the chair Silas had knocked over. She sat down. "Does anyone else have a motion to remove me?" she asked the room. The board members shook their heads frantically. "Good," Victoria said, meeting adjourned. An hour later, they were alone in her office. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. Victoria poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from the crystal decanter. Her hands were finally steady. She handed a glass to Julian. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline, loosening his tie. "To the grease monkey," Victoria toasted, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. Julian turned, clinking his glass against hers, "To the boss." They drank. The whiskey burned, warm and grounding. "You saved me today," Victoria said quietly. "Again, you read the books. I thought you just fixed the machine." "I read everything, Victoria. Engines, spreadsheets. They're the same. If it knocks, something is loose." Silas was loose. He set the glass down and looked at her. The triumph of the afternoon was fading, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. So Julian said, Silas is gone. The stock is stable. The press loves the story. Yes, Victoria said. Which means, Julian continued, his voice tight, the crisis is over. You don't need a bodyguard anymore. And you probably don't need a fake husband. Victoria felt a sharp pang in her chest. He was giving her an out. He was offering to leave. Is that what you want? Victoria asked, stepping closer. To go back to the garage, to the quiet life. Julian looked at her. He took a step closer, invading her space. No, he said honestly. I hated the quiet. He reached out, his hand hesitating before brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric. Victoria, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. When we kissed in the factory, you told me it was just adrenaline. Victoria's breath hitched. I did. Was it? Julian asked. His amber eyes searched hers, demanding the truth. Because I've been in fights before. I've had adrenaline highs, and none of them felt like that. Victoria looked at the man standing in her office. The man who had worn a tuxedo for her, fought for her, and dismantled her enemies with a wrench and a spreadsheet. She thought about the empty side of the bed, the DMZ. No, Victoria whispered. She reached up, her hand finding the lapel of his jacket. It wasn't adrenaline. Then what are we doing, Victoria? Julian asked. Because this contract says we stay married for a year. But I can't do this for a year if it is fake. I can't wake up next to you every morning and pretend I don't want to touch you. Then don't pretend, Victoria said. She grabbed his tie and pulled him down. This time, there was no hesitation, no surprise. Julian groaned low in his throat and caught her, lifting her up onto the heavy oak desk, sweeping aside the quarterly reports and the unfinished contracts. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and devastatingly real. It was a claim. Julian, she gasped against his mouth. Lock the door! He kissed her jaw, his hands tightening on her waist. I already did. Here is the continuation, maintaining the high conflict pacing and the power couple dynamic your audience craves. The sun streamed through the floor to ceiling windows of the penthouse, unforgiving and bright. Victoria stirred, her body aching in places she had forgotten existed. She reached out instinctively. The bed beside her was warm, but empty. She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. The DMZ pillow, the one she had jokingly placed between them days ago, was currently face down on the floor near the bathroom door. Panic flared for a split second. Had he left? Was last night a mistake? A reaction to the adrenaline of the boardroom? Then she smelled it. Coffee, bacon, and something that smelled suspiciously like homemade biscuits. She grabbed Julian's discarded dress shirt from the floor, buttoned it over her bare skin, and walked out to the kitchen. Julian was there. He was shirtless, wearing only his suit trousers. Barefoot on the cold marble, he was flipping an omelet with the same casual precision he used to strip an engine. The scars on his back, faint white lines from years of manual labor, glinted in the sunlight. He turned as she entered. He didn't look sheepish. He didn't look regretful. He looked at her wearing his shirt, and a slow, possessive heat darkened his eyes. Morning, boss, he drawled, sliding a plate onto the counter. Eat. You didn't have dinner. Victoria climbed onto the bar stool, trying to regain her CEO composure. It was difficult when her legs still felt like jelly. We need to talk about last night, she said, her voice husky. Do we? Julian leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. I thought we communicated pretty clearly. Julian, the contract, Victoria. He walked around the island and stood between her knees. He placed his hands on the counter on either side of her, trapping her. You didn't marry a signature. You married a man, and I'm done pretending I'm just a guest in this house. He leaned in, his nose brushing hers. Unless you want me to go, back to the couch, back to the garage. Victoria looked at him. The safety he offered wasn't the safe boredom of Preston. It was the safety of a wolf guarding its mate. No, she whispered, grabbing his neck and pulling him down for a hard, bruising kiss. The couch is officially retired. Their domestic bubble popped at 10 a.m., her assistant, Marcus, called. Victoria, Marcus sounded strained. You've been invited to the Prescott family charity gala tonight at the plaza. Victoria froze. The Prescott Gala. It was the highlight of the social season, hosted by Preston and Julian's parents. The same parents who had disowned Julian years ago. The same parents who had likely funded Preston's affair with Sarah. They want a show, Julian said from the doorway. Having heard the tone of the conversation, they think we won't show up. They think we're hiding in shame because of the scandal. If we don't go, Victoria said, mind racing. The stock takes a hit. Rumors of instability will start. And if we do go, Julian added, his jaw tight, we're walking into a room full of people who think I'm trash and you're a bitter, abandoned woman. Victoria hung up the phone. She stood up, the steel returning to her spine. Get your tuxedo, Julian. You want to go. I don't just want to go, Victoria said, her eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying light. I want to ruin their night. I want to walk in there and look so good that Preston chokes on his champagne. Julian grinned. It was a wicked, dangerous look. I'll drive. The Plaza Hotel was a sea of flashbulbs. A limousine pulled up. Preston and Sarah stepped out. Sarah was wearing a pale pink dress. 2 ruffles, too young, too prom queen. She smiled anxiously at the cameras, clinging to Preston's arm. Preston looked pale, sweating under the lights. The questions from the paparazzi were brutal. Preston, is it true you lost your seat on the board? Sarah, did you know he was engaged? Preston, any comment on your brother taking your job? They hurried inside, heads down, defeated. 5 minutes later, a low rumble shook the pavement. It wasn't a limo. It was a vintage 1967 Shelby Cobra, jet black, restored to perfection. The engine growled like a beast. The driver's door opened. Julian stepped out. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo tailored to within an inch of its life. He looked like James Bond, if Bond had dirt under his fingernails and a grudge. He walked around and opened the passenger door. Victoria emerged. The crowd went silent, then exploded. She wore emerald green, a backless silk gown that clung to her curves like a second skin. It was the color of money, the color of envy. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen who had just executed a traitor. Julian offered his arm. Ready to make a scene, Mrs. Prescott. Always, Mr. Prescott. They walked past the photographers, not rushing, not hiding. When a reporter shouted, "Victoria, are you heartbroken?" she simply turned, looked at Julian and smiled a smile that said, "Does it look like I downgraded?" Inside, the ballroom was suffocating with expensive perfume and judgment. When Victoria and Julian entered, the room went quiet. The orchestra seemed to falter. Julian's mother, a woman made of Botox and pearls, turned her back on them instantly. But Preston stared. He was holding a glass of scotch, watching Victoria laugh at something Julian whispered in her ear. He watched Julian's hand rest possessively on the small of Victoria's back. A place Preston used to touch. He couldn't handle it. Sarah was tugging at his sleeve. "Babe, let's go dance. People are looking." "Shut up, Sarah," Preston hissed. He marched across the room, fueled by liquid courage and wounded ego. He intercepted Victoria as she was grabbing a Faye. Julian had stepped away for 2 seconds to get drinks. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" Preston sneered, blocking her path. Victoria looked at him over the rim of her glass. "The gala? It's a bit tacky this year. Honestly, the floral arrangements are wilting." "Don't play dumb, Vic. You brought him here to humiliate me." "My reject brother." Preston leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Stop the act. I know you. You are cold. You are rigid. Julian is going to get bored of you in a month. He likes wild things, not ice queens." It was the old trigger. The insecurity Preston had planted in her head for years. "You are too work-focused. You are not fun." But tonight, it didn't hurt. It just sounded pathetic. "Preston," she said, her voice calm. "I'm not cold. I was just bored." Preston blinked, stunned. "What?" "I was bored with you," she clarified brutally. "I was bored of carrying you. I was bored of fixing your mistakes. And honestly, I was bored in the bedroom." Preston's face turned a violent shade of red. "You bitch." He reached out to grab her wrist. Before his fingers could graze her skin, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. It wasn't a friendly tap. It was a clamp. Julian was back. He held 2 glasses of champagne in one hand, and with the other, he was squeezing Preston's shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Problem, brother?" Julian asked pleasantly, though his eyes were murder. "She is lying to you," Preston sputtered, trying to shrug off the grip. "She is using you," Julian laughed. He leaned in close enough that only Preston and Victoria could hear. "If she is using me, Preston, I am the happiest man alive, because unlike you, I know what she is worth." Julian released him with a shove. "Now, go find your girlfriend. She's crying near the shrimp cocktail again." Preston looked around. People were staring. He had lost again. He turned and fled the ballroom. Julian handed Victoria her champagne. His eyes scanned her face, searching for cracks. "You okay?" Victoria took a sip, the bubbles sharp on her tongue. She looked at the door where Preston had run away. Then she looked at the man standing beside her, solid, unshakable, and hers. "I am perfect," she said. "Take me home, Julian. I want to continue our negotiations from this morning." Julian's smile was the only trophy she needed. "Let's go." Here is the continuation of the story, maintaining the high-impact emotional beats and ensuring the pacing stays tight for your audience. The paparazzi photos were everywhere by 8 a.m. Page 6 ran the headline, "The Duchess and the Drifter. Sterling. Prescott steal the show at the Plaza." Another tabloid was less kind to Preston. Preston, who Victoria Sterling upgrades to the brother with the muscle car. Victoria sat at the kitchen island of the penthouse, scrolling through the articles on her iPad. She wasn't gloating. She was analyzing the stock ticker in the corner of the screen. Sterling Enterprises was up another 4%. The market loved a power couple. Then the phone rang, not her cell, the landline, the one reserved for family emergencies and lawyers. It was Elena Sterling, her mother, Victoria. Elena's voice was clipped, devoid of warmth. "I see you've turned our family merger into a circus." Victoria sighed, rubbing her temples. "Good morning to you too, Mother. The stock is up. The merger is secure. What's the issue?" "The issue," Elena snapped, "is that you married the spare, the mechanic, the disappointment. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for your father and me at the club? People are saying you picked him up off the street. He is a Prescott mother. He has the name. He fulfilled the contract. And what happens when he gets bored of playing CEO? What happens when he realizes he's just a placeholder for a real businessman? You think a man who fixes cars for a living can handle a boardroom. You're delusional. Victoria, fix this. Annul the marriage. Get Preston back. He's weak, but at least he's housebroken. Victoria looked up as Julian walked into the kitchen. He was buttoning a crisp white dress shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. He froze when he saw her face. The mask was back, the cold, impenetrable look she wore when she was hurting. "I have to go, Mother," Victoria said, her voice brittle. She hung up. "Who was that?" Julian asked, his voice low. "My mother," Victoria said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. Though it was already perfect, just checking in. Julian walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He just stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. "She told you to dump me, didn't she?" Victoria didn't answer. She turned away to pour coffee, her hand trembling slightly. "She thinks you are a liability. She thinks I made a mistake." "And do you?" Julian asked. Victoria spun around. "Of course not. You saved the company. You saved me. Then why are you looking at me like I am about to leave?" Julian challenged. He stepped into her space, trapping her against the counter again. "You think I care what Elena Sterling thinks. I care what you think," she said. Victoria's voice cracked. She said you'd get bored, that you are just playing a role. Julian let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He braced his hands on the counter on either side of her hips. "Victoria, look at me." She looked up. His amber eyes were fierce, burning with intensity. "I have spent my entire life being told I wasn't good enough, by my father, by my brother, by society. But I walked into that boardroom yesterday, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged. Not because of the suit, because of you." He leaned down, his forehead. "I am not bored, and I am definitely not playing. You are stuck with me, boss." Victoria felt the tension in her chest snap. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. He smelled of soap and safety. "Warning, I can be difficult," she murmured. "Good," Julian growled. Kissing her hair, easy is boring. 2 weeks later, the honeymoon phase ended abruptly. It was a Tuesday. Julian was at the downtown office overseeing the logistics overhaul. Victoria was uptown, meeting with investors. At 2 p.m., alarms started blaring in the main server room of Sterling Enterprises. Authorized access codes were being used to delete files. Not just any files, the entire R&D database for the new electric vehicle prototype, the company's future. "Shut it down," the IT director screamed. "Cut the hard lines." By the time the system was locked, 40% of the prototype data was corrupted. Victoria arrived 20 minutes later, breathless. Julian was already there, his tie gone, sleeves rolled up, staring at a wall of monitors with the security team. "Who did this?" Victoria demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "Was it a hack?" "No," Julian said grimly. "It was an inside job. Someone used an executive login." "Whose?" Julian turned slowly to face her. His face was unreadable. "Mine," Victoria stared at him. "What?" The login used was J. Prescott Fademan. The security chief confirmed nervously. "It was accessed from a remote terminal at 1:45 p.m. I was in a meeting with the union reps at 1:45, Julian said calmly. "I have 20 witnesses. Then someone stole your credentials," Victoria said, her mind racing. "Who has access to your laptop, your phone?" Julian's eyes darkened. "Nobody, except," he stopped. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It went straight to voicemail. "Preston," Julian said, the name sounding like a curse. "He came by the garage yesterday to pick up some old boxes he left behind." I left him alone in the office for 5 minutes while I took a call. He installed a keylogger, the IT director realized. He stole your password. Victoria felt sick. Preston wasn't smart enough to do this alone. Sarah, she whispered. Her father owns a cybersecurity firm. She gave him the tool. This isn't just sabotage, Julian said, his voice deadly quiet. This is a frame-up. They want to make it look like I'm incompetent, or worse, a traitor selling secrets. The boardroom doors burst open. 3 board members, Elena Sterling's friends, marched in. We heard the news, one of them announced. A massive data breach, traced to Mr. Prescott's account. Victoria, I hate to say I told you so, but get out, Julian said. He didn't shout, he didn't move, but the menace in his voice made the board members flinch. Excuse me, you heard him, Victoria said. Stepping up beside Julian, she took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. My husband is not a thief. He is the victim of corporate espionage. And if you think for 1 second I'm going to let you use this to oust him, you are mistaken. She turned to the security chief. Pull the camera footage from Julian's garage yesterday. Find me proof that Preston was near that laptop. I want it in an hour. And you, she pointed at the board members. If another word about this leaks to the press before we have the facts, I will replace every single one of you. Do I make myself clear? The board members scurried out like frightened rats. When the door closed, Victoria turned to Julian. His hand was gripping hers so tight it hurt. They're coming for us, Julian, she said softly. Let them come, Julian said. He pulled her into a fierce, desperate hug. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They messed with my wife's company. He pulled back, his eyes burning with a cold, calculating fury. Preston wants a war. Fine, I'm done playing defense. They didn't go to the police. That would be too slow, too public. Instead, they went to work. Julian spent the night in the server room with the IT team, hunting digital footprints. Victoria spent the night with her legal team, drafting scorched earth's lawsuits. By morning, they had it. The security footage from the garage clearly showed Preston plugging a USB drive into Julian's laptop while Julian was outside. And the tracing on the data wipe led back to an IP address registered to a penthouse apartment owned by Sarah's father. We have them, Victoria said, looking at the evidence spread across her desk. We can bury them. Grand larceny, corporate espionage, fraud. We could, Julian agreed. He was drinking black coffee, looking tired but wired. Or? Julian tapped the file on the table. We use it, we call a press conference. We don't just announce the breach. We announce that Sterling Enterprises has successfully thwarted an attack by a competitor. We name Sarah's father's company. We imply Preston was a pawn. Victoria's eyes widened. You want to destroy Sarah's family business? I want to protect ours, Julian said simply. And I want Preston to know that every time he tries to hurt us, he loses something he loves. Victoria looked at her husband. He wasn't the rough mechanic anymore. He was a shark, a king. And God help her, she had never been more attracted to him. Do it, she said. The press conference was a massacre. Victoria stood at the podium, Julian at her side. She presented the evidence with clinical precision. We are saddened, Victoria told the reporters, that former associates would resort to criminal activity to destabilize our innovation. We are pressing full charges against Preston Prescott and the Vance cybersecurity firm. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Preston was arrested an hour later at his country club, crying as he was handcuffed. Sarah's father's stock plummeted 30% in 10 minutes, back in the penthouse that evening. The silence was heavy. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of victory. Victoria was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. Julian was pacing, the adrenaline still coursing through him. "It is over," Victoria said softly. "Preston is done. Sarah is done. The board is terrified of us." Julian stopped pacing. He looked at her. "Is it? Is what?" Julian said. "The contract, the year isn't up, but the threat is gone. You don't need me to protect your seat anymore. You've proven you're untouchable." He walked over to the couch and sat down, leaving a foot of space between them. "You could annul it now, claim I served my purpose. No one would blame you." Victoria set her wineglass down on the coffee table with a sharp clink. She turned to face him, anger flashing in her blue eyes. "Why do you keep trying to fire yourself, Julian?" "Because," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize you married the wrong brother, that you want the pedigree, not the grease." Victoria moved. She didn't just lean over. She climbed into his lap, straddling him, her hands grabbing his face to force him to look at her. "You idiot," she whispered fiercely. "Preston was the mistake. You are the upgrade. You are the partner. You are the man who makes me feel safe when the world is burning." She kissed him. It wasn't a sweet kiss. It was a desperate, claiming kiss. "I don't want an annulment," she breathed against his lips. "I want a renewal. I want to tear up that prenup. I want everything. 50 divided by 50. You and me forever." Julian's hands gripped her waist, pulling her flush against him. The look in his eyes was raw, vulnerable, and completely devoted. "Forever is a long time, boss." Good Victoria smirked, unbuttoning his shirt. "We have a lot of work to do." It had been 30 days since the boardroom coup. The dust had settled. The stock prices were stabilizing at a comfortable high. The Preston problem had been quietly escorted off the premises by legal counsel. Victoria sat in her corner office, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind her like a backdrop she personally commissioned. On her desk, perfectly centered, sat a single document, the prenuptial and interim partnership agreement. According to paragraph 4, section B, upon resolution of the hostile takeover threat, the husband is entitled to a severance package and an immediate, uncontested annulment. The door opened. Julian didn't knock. He'd stopped knocking weeks ago. He walked in carrying a garment bag and 2 coffees from the bodegas. He still insisted on visiting. He looked different now. The grease under the fingernails was gone, replaced by a Patek Philippe watch, but he still walked like a man who could dismantle the room with a screwdriver. "Black 2 sugars," he said, setting the cup down on a coaster. "And your dry cleaning. They tried to charge you double for the silk. I negotiated." Victoria didn't smile. She slid the contract across the mahogany desk toward him. "We need to talk about your exit strategy, Julian." He stopped. The air in the room shifted from domestic to electric. He looked at the paper, then at her. His expression was unreadable. "My what?" "The crisis is over," Victoria said, her voice steady, professional. Too professional. "You fulfilled your end of the bargain. The check is already cut, enough to buy your old garage and 3 more just like it. You're free." She held her breath, waiting. This was the test. Was he the mercenary she hired or the partner she accidentally acquired? Julian picked up the document. He scanned the legal jargon, the calculated payout, the clean break. Then, with a dry chuckle, he looked up. "You know, for a genius CEO, you have terrible instincts about people." The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet office. Victoria's eyes widened as Julian tore the contract down the middle. Then again and again, until the $1 million exit strategy was nothing but confetti on her pristine floor. That was a very expensive piece of paper, Victoria said, her voice dropping an octave. I don't want the garage, Julian said, walking around the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing in her personal space, that forbidden zone she usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He leaned down, placing his hands on the armrests of her chair, trapping her. He smelled of expensive cologne and that lingering, dangerous scent of motor oil. And I don't want the severance. Then what do you want? Victoria challenged, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. I can be very difficult, Julian. I'm married to my job. I work weekends. I don't bake cookies. I hate cookies, he deadpanned. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes, dark with intent. And I've discovered I have a taste for corporate warfare. It's surprisingly stimulating. He reached out, his thumb grazing her jawline. I'm not quitting, boss, unless you're firing me for incompetence. Victoria looked at him. She saw the challenge in his eyes. He wasn't asking for love. He was asking for the game to continue. He was betting on them. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Your performance reviews have been adequate, she admitted softly. Adequate. I'll aim for exceeds expectations next quarter. The elevator doors chimed in the lobby of the Metropolitan Opera House. Cameras flashed, a blinding wall of white light. Victoria stepped out first. She wore midnight blue, velvet, sharp and elegant. Julian was right behind her, adjusting his cufflinks. They moved in perfect sync, a unified front that terrified their competitors and delighted the tabloids. As they reached the top of the stairs, a reporter shouted from the fray, Mrs. Sterling Prescott, is it true the marriage was just a business arrangement? Victoria paused. She felt Julian's hand settle on the small of her back, warm, possessive, solid. It was the anchor she hadn't known she needed. She turned to the cameras, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. Every successful marriage is a business arrangement, darling, she purred. She looked up at Julian. He winked. A tiny, imperceptible gesture just for her. One that said, we know the truth. Shall we? He asked, offering his arm. Let's go initiate a hostile takeover of the dance floor, she replied. They walked into the gala together, neither leading nor following. Just two sharks swimming in the same direction. The contract was gone. The future was unwritten. And honestly, they liked the odds. Let's discuss the fragile woman trap. Preston left Victoria because Sarah made him feel needed. She was a mess, and he wanted to be the savior. Victoria was functional, wealthy, and composed, which terrified him. Weak men are often intimidated by women who don't need saving, so they run to women who need fixing. But notice the shift. Victoria didn't try to soften herself to win him back. She didn't dim her light. She found a man, Julian, who didn't want a damsel to rescue, but a queen to rule with. Julian wasn't intimidated by her power. He was turned on by it. Ladies, if you have to break yourself into pieces to fit into a man's life, you are with the wrong man. The right partner will look at your empire and say, good foundation, let's add another floor. So, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been told you were too much, too independent, or too cold? Just because you had your life together, did you try to shrink yourself? Or did you find someone who could match your stride? Let's discuss the upgrade in the comments below. Madam, read out,